The cold wind howled through the trees as I turned the key in the lock of my late father's cabin, my cabin now. I had inherited the place fair and square, nestled in the heart of the Rockies, where my family had spent generations carving life from wilderness. But the moment the porch light flickered on, headlights flooded the driveway. 2 HOA reps stepped out, clipboard in hand, eyes cold as stone. "You can't live here," one said flatly. "HOA regulations. Property rights revoked." I laughed at first. I thought it was a joke. But by nightfall, they had the police at my door, and that was their first mistake. Because if they wanted a fight over land and legacy, they were about to meet a storm. Here is *** part 1. The inheritance they couldn't control, *** exactly 1,000 words, with no labels, no headings, and a smooth cinematic flow. The gravel crunched under my tires as I turned onto the old forest road, breath fogging inside the windshield. It had been 10 years since I'd last seen this place. But the cabin still stood like a sentinel against the tree line, weathered, solid, mine. My father built it with his own hands, long before property lines and paperwork tried to chain the wilderness. Now it was mine, left to me in his will, free and clear. At least, that's what I thought. I stepped out, boots hitting the frozen ground, and just stood there for a moment. The scent of pine, the absolute silence. I didn't even realize how much I'd needed this until right then. Peace, freedom, legacy. I unlocked the cabin, flicked the switch, and watched the warm yellow lights hum to life. Everything was just as he left it. The worn leather chair, the rifles above the mantel, the dent in the table from when I split it with a hatchet. At 16, I unloaded my truck, lit the fireplace, and poured a glass of the bourbon he used to keep in the cupboard. Just one night to breathe. That was the plan. But then headlights cut through the dark, sweeping across the walls. I stepped to the window, a black SUV. 2 people stepped out. 1 woman, 1 man, both wearing HOA badges like they were FBI agents. The man had a clipboard. The woman held up her phone and started filming. "You're trespassing," she said as I opened the door. "This is my home," I replied. "I have the deed." "Ownership doesn't mean you can reside here," the man said, flipping a page. "Per Regulation 7.6b of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association, full-time habitation requires pre-approval by the board, and the structure lacks the modifications required by the Residential Compliance Subcommittee." I blinked. "This cabin has stood for 50 years. It predates your entire development, which is exactly why it falls under review," she snapped. "You were mailed notices." "I got junk mail," I said, and threw it out. "That's unfortunate," she said, tapping her phone screen. "We'll be calling law enforcement." I laughed then, genuinely thinking they were bluffing. "You're calling the cops on a guy for sleeping in his own inherited cabin? You're in violation. We have legal authority." I shut the door. I didn't think much of it. HOA drama was for manicured lawns and bitter retirees, not for a hunting cabin 5 miles off the paved road. I turned off the porch light and went to stoke the fire again. Then I saw the red and blue flash through the window. It was fast. 2 sheriff's deputies, knocking hard. No sirens, but their posture said they were here for business. "Evening," I said, stepping outside again. "Is this really happening?" "We received a trespassing report," the younger deputy said, his hand resting on his belt. "I have ID. I have the will. You want to see the deed? We just need to confirm you're not occupying the property against HOA regulations," the older one said, less aggressively. "I'm not occupying. I'm spending the night in a cabin I legally own. And I'll be damned if a committee tells me I can't." They took my ID, ran it. The woman from the HOA stood behind them smirking, whispering to the man with the clipboard. I could hear her. "Non-compliance. This is exactly why we need enforcement. If we let one person through, they'll all move in. No permits, no standards. This isn't a suburb," I said. "This is a mountain." When the deputies handed back my license, their tone softened. "Look," the older one said, "technically, they can't evict you tonight. But if there's a legal dispute, it's better to resolve it through the courts. They might file an injunction, so you're siding with them." "We're saying don't escalate," the younger one added. "Just don't make things harder." I stood there watching the SUV's taillights fade as they followed the police down the road. Then I went back inside, locked the door, and sat by the fire with my bourbon untouched. I didn't sleep much, not because I was afraid, because I was angry. This wasn't about rules, it was about control. My dad built this land into something lasting, and the minute he died, they came circling like vultures. The HOA had expanded in recent years, swallowing up land parcels, pushing their rules into places they didn't belong. But they hadn't counted on someone pushing back. The next morning, I drove down to the county clerk's office. I spent 5 hours digging through filings. The Cedar Ridge HOA had slipped in a new provision last year, one that reclassified certain historic non-conforming structures as conditional usage zones. They've done it quietly, buried in jargon, and mailed it out in fonte most people didn't even know, and that clause gave them the power to challenge ownership residency if not revoke it. But here's the thing. They'd missed something. My father had placed a rider in the deed, stating that the cabin was a primary legacy residence. and that it shall be exempt from external jurisdiction as long as it wasn't demolished or significantly remodeled, a clause only valid because the property had never been subdivided and because he'd filed the rider. Before the HOA officially expanded its boundary, they didn't know that. Not yet. I made copies. I filed a motion for declaratory judgment. I wasn't going to just respond. I was going to go on offense. As I left the courthouse, my phone buzzed. A voicemail? HOA. This is Amanda from Cedar Ridge Enforcement, the voice said, clipped and smugged. We've been informed you've attempted to reoccupy the disputed structure. We're notifying our attorney. Any presence on site from this point forward will be viewed as criminal trespass. I stood in the parking lot, watching the mountains shimmer in the distance. The sun was setting behind the ridge, turning everything blood red, and all I could think was, you picked the wrong cabin, and the wrong man. By the time I drove back to the cabin, I wasn't just determined, I was surgical. I knew what I was dealing with now. This wasn't just about property rights. It was a chess game, and the HOA was betting I didn't know how to play. But they didn't know who raised me. My father didn't just build with his hands, he fought with his mind. He taught me that the most dangerous man in any room is the one who listens first and strikes only once. The next morning, I returned to the county recorder's office. I requested access to every public document tied to Cedar Ridge HOA's articles of incorporation, rule amendments, enforcement protocols, and meeting minutes. The clerk raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. I spent hours sifting through dry language, cross-referencing dates, and highlighting inconsistencies. There were plenty. They'd amended their enforcement authority 3 times in the last 2 years, all after absorbing more land. But nowhere in their filings had they formally included my plot. They mentioned it by implication, not by recorded boundary. That's critical. Legally, implication isn't inclusion, but most people wouldn't know that, or care to fight it. I started a file, printed documents, marked dates, lined up their errors like targets at a shooting range. Then I dug deeper. Their board president, Amanda, the one who called me, had only moved into the community 2 years ago. Her husband, Roger, was a contractor who'd secured nearly $500,000 in compliance upgrade contracts from the HOA during her tenure. Conflict of interest. And very public if someone wanted to make it so. I went online. HOA forums, Reddit threads, angry Facebook groups. It didn't take long to find the others, the ones they'd bullied. One man was fined $7,000 for repainting his deck the wrong shade of tan. A widow was sued for putting wind chimes too close to the sidewalk. A retired vet had his truck towed 3 times for unauthorized parking, even though it was parked in his own driveway. They called it order. I called it sanctioned harassment. I reached out, quietly. I didn't start a rebellion. I asked questions, listened. People were angry, but they were afraid. They'd seen what happened to the ones who pushed back. But fear only works until someone shows them the cost of silence is higher. On Wednesday, I returned to the cabin. This time I brought a game camera and mounted it discreetly in a tree, just in case. I wasn't stupid. If they couldn't beat me in court, they'd try other means. Sure, enough. The next night I caught a white SUV pulling into the property. Someone got out, walked the perimeter, took photos, tried the front door handle. When it didn't open, they keyed the side of the truck I'd parked beside the shed. I didn't confront them. I didn't call the police. I just saved the footage and backed it up twice. The next morning, I sent a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA, certified mail, with copies to the county sheriff and my attorney. It included the deed with the protective rider, the video evidence of trespass and vandalism documentation, of the boundary exclusion from their expansion filings, a formal demand for withdrawal of all enforcement, threats within 10 business days. I didn't bluff. I didn't threaten. I presented facts like blades, laid out an order. Then I waited. On day 3. I got an email from a name I didn't recognize. Martin Langston, HOA Vice President. It was short. Can we meet in person? Off the record, I agreed. We met at a diner in town, middle booth, away from windows. He looked tired. Wore a wedding ring he kept twisting. I don't agree with everything Amanda does, he started. I didn't respond. Just let the silence hang. She's aggressive, but the board votes, and she pushes things through. You're not the only one she's gone after, but you're the first to fight back like this. Not fighting, just correcting, I said. She thinks you're a threat to cohesion. If one person lives outside the rules, others will follow. That's her logic. I don't live outside the rules. I said, I live outside her jurisdiction. He nodded, glanced around. Between us, you have them cornered. That clause in your deed, it's airtight. The rest of the board didn't even know it existed. So why hasn't she backed off? Because she doesn't lose. She doubles down. I leaned in slightly. And what about you? He looked away. I joined the board to make the community better. It's not better. It's scared. I slid a USB drive across the table. Meeting minutes, voter manipulation, vendor contracts. All public record, just not publicized. Not yet. He didn't touch it. You're going scorched earth. Only if they make me. He stood to leave, but paused. If there's a vote to remove her, the bylaws allow it with a majority. If I swing 2 more votes, then do it, I said, before she drags all of you down with her. When I left the diner, I felt something shift. It wasn't over, but the air was changing. They weren't used to resistance. They were used to silence. The next day, Amanda filed for a temporary restraining order claiming I had threatened her. It was denied. The judge cited lack of evidence and noted her complaint as inconsistent and procedurally unusual. She was cracking. I received an anonymous envelope at the cabin 2 days later. No return address. Inside were printed copies of internal emails between Amanda and Roger, the contractor husband, detailing kickback arrangements and expedited payments. A notepaper clipped to the top read, "Thought you might need this. Burn after reading." I didn't burn it. I scanned it, archived it, sent it to a local journalist with no name. Just a Dropbox link and a timer for scheduled release. I knew Amanda would make one last move. People like her always do something big. Loud, meant to scare, but I had already flipped the board, vice president, compiled a mountain of documentation, and started quiet conversations with neighbors who'd been trampled. The power she thought she had? It was rotting from the inside out. She didn't know it yet, but I wasn't just defending a cabin anymore. I was coming for the whole kingdom she'd built on fear. The leak hit on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting on the porch, watching the mist peel off the treetops, when my phone started buzzing like a trapped hornet. Texts, emails, notifications from a burner Reddit thread I'd set up just in case the press didn't move fast enough. But the press did move. The article landed like a punch to the throat. Asterisk, HOA. President under fire for alleged corruption. Illegal enforcement tactics. Asterisk, there it was. Scanned emails, contract records, direct links between Amanda and the payouts to her husband's contracting firm. Line after line of HOA funds funneled through compliance upgrades that only Roger's company ever won the bids for. Paired with interviews from half a dozen residents I'd quietly encouraged to speak out: retirees, single moms, veterans, real people with real stories. And one name kept coming up in every headline: Amanda Carr, president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. By noon, the HOA board had scheduled an emergency closed-door meeting. By 2, members resigned, citing personal reasons. By 3, I received a voicemail from a lawyer claiming to represent Amanda, warning me of defamation, liability, and civil exposure. I laughed, because I wasn't the source. The records were public, the truth was public, and it was spreading like fire in dry brush. That night, I drove down into town and parked across from the HOA community center, where the board meeting was being held. It was packed, more residents than chairs. People lined the walls. A few held printed copies of the article in their hands. One woman had scrawled, "Where's our money?" on a poster board. I stayed outside, leaning against the truck, not needing to go in. Let them feel what I felt: the violation, the rage, the sharp realization that the people meant to serve them had turned into gatekeepers of a fake little kingdom. Inside, voices rose. Someone shouted. A man stormed out, throwing his chair back. Amanda tried to maintain control. I could see her through the windows, standing stiff, lips pressed into a line. She had ruled by intimidation for too long. But fear is fragile, and hers was unraveling. The next morning, I filed a civil complaint against the HOA for attempted unlawful eviction, trespassing, and property damage. I attached a vandalism footage. I included the voicemail she'd left. I cited the property deed, the legacy rider, and the exclusion of my land from their recorded jurisdiction. But I didn't stop there. I created a detailed website. Clean design, no emotion, just facts. Every abuse, every fine, every quietly buried enforcement letter. Anonymous testimonials, screenshots, documents. The goal wasn't revenge. It was exposure. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, my father used to say. And then came the move that turned everything upside down. I bought shares in the land management company that handled maintenance for the community, roads, water, and waste systems, the ones the HOA contracted with. They didn't know I'd done it until a scheduled routine maintenance fee increase got denied at the board level. And their favorite contractor, Rogers, secondary shell company, was rejected in favor of a neutral third-party firm, one Amanda didn't control. That's when she snapped. I got a visit that night. Not from board members. From a man in a dark sedan who parked too far from the gate and walked up my drive like he belonged. I watched from the shadows by the shed, my father's old rifle cold in my hands, unloaded. But he didn't know that. "Lot of noise coming out of here lately," he said, voice low. "Care to be more specific?" I asked, stepping into the light. "You're not making friends. Might want to think about quieting down before someone makes that decision for you." He wasn't HOA. He wasn't even local. Hired muscle. A desperate move. "Tell Amanda I don't scare," I said. "And if anyone comes back here uninvited again, I won't call a lawyer. I'll call the press." He stared at me for a long second, then left the way he came. I recorded the entire interaction and forwarded it anonymously to the sheriff's office. I knew someone there. Quietly, they started asking questions. By the end of the week, Amanda's attorney resigned. Her husband's company was suspended pending investigation. The HOA board held another meeting, this time public, where the remaining members voted to suspend Amanda indefinitely and appoint an interim. President Martin Langston, he called me the next morning. We've decided to formally withdraw any and all enforcement claims against you, he said, effective immediately. Good, I said, and he added, we're voting next month to update the bylaws. No more overreach, no more abuse of power. You do that, I said, and keep your people out of the trees. I still have cameras up. There was silence for a moment. Are you done? He finally asked. I looked out across the ridge, the wind pushing through the pines. The cabin stood exactly as it had 50 years ago, unbothered, unchanged. Not yet, said Ed, but close. I spent the next few days quietly, cut firewood, repaired the truck's scratched paint, hiked the old trails my father once showed me, boots crunching over the forgotten places of the world. Neighbors started stopping by. Some brought pies, some brought stories. All brought thanks. They weren't afraid anymore. Amanda hadn't been seen in days. Her house sat dark. Her SUV gone. Whispers said she'd left the state. Others said she was lawyering up. I didn't care. Either way, she'd built a throne out of fine print and fear, and I turned every inch of it against her. The first snowfall came early that year. Thick, quiet, and clean. I woke up to a white sheet stretched over everything. The cabin roof, the dirt road, the pine branches bowed low like they were praying. I stepped outside with coffee steaming in my hands and listened to nothing. No phones ringing, no headlights, no HOA officials with clipboards. Just the woods breathing. It felt like the land had taken a deep sigh of relief. Amanda's resignation became official the next week. Martin sent a formal letter, typed, signed, and sent through registered mail, a final acknowledgement that every claim against me had been dropped. He even included a handwritten postscript. You reminded us what this place was supposed to be. Thank you. I tacked it to the wall next to my father's old fishing photo, where he's holding a trout like it was a trophy. Justice didn't roar. It didn't explode. It settled, quiet and heavy like the snow. Still, I wasn't done. The community elected a new board by the end of the season, a group of younger residents, some retirees, a single mom named Claudia who had once been fined $500 for painting her door blue. She smiled at me when I showed up to the meeting, a real smile. No fear behind it. I sat in the back, listening. No need to speak anymore. My work was already baked into the walls. I gave the USB drive with all the leftover files, the unused evidence, the deeper records, to a local attorney who volunteered for housing justice cases. Just in case, I told him, never. Burn the matches when the wind's still blowing. He nodded like he understood. People around here understood more than they let on. Amanda disappeared completely after that. Her house was put on the market through a third-party realtor. Her husband filed for divorce 3 weeks later. No official charges stuck. But her reputation didn't need a conviction. She'd already been sentenced by the court of her neighbors. Silence became her exile. I kept to myself through the winter. Fixed the back porch, refinished the old wooden floors, hung new shutters. I didn't change the cabin, I just brought it back to life. Exactly the way it had always been. A place built by hands, not rules. I walked the ridge trail almost every morning, the same one my dad and I used to take before sunrise, with rifles strapped to our backs and thermoses full of burnt coffee. Sometimes I'd sit at the top, looking down at the valley below where the houses were spaced just far enough apart to pretend they weren't a community. Just individuals pretending their privacy wasn't rented. That was what the HOA had never understood. They tried to turn a place of solitude into a place of control. And I took it back. In spring, the county quietly reclassified my land as historically independent residential, based on the deed rider. That was Martin's doing, pushed through in a closed council vote. It ensured no future board could ever claim authority over it again. The land was mine. By law, by history, by blood. A young couple bought the old Mitchell place 2 lots over. They had a baby and a golden retriever that barked every time I drove past. I didn't mind. They waved at me every time. I waved back. One afternoon, I found a note folded under a rock by the trailhead. No name, no return address. Just 4 words, written in a looping, careful hand. You won? We lost. I didn't know if it was Amanda or someone who had stood with her. It didn't matter. Winning wasn't the point anymore. The cabin didn't feel like a trophy. It felt like a promise kept. To my father, to myself. On the anniversary of my first night back, I lit the old fireplace, poured a glass of the same bourbon, and sat in his leather chair. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat in silence. That was the victory. That was the revenge. No one standing at my door, no one calling it trespass, no headlights in the dark, just firewood crackling, and the soft hush of wind rolling down the mountain like a lullaby for those who never surrendered. And the best part? No one dared to try again.